Imagine for a moment a sea of people, not the metaphorical kind, but a literal physical ocean of humanity. A million bodies, vibrant and pulsing, gathered under the banner of the art of love. This was meant to be the 2010 Love Parade in Duisburg, Germany, a celebration of electronic music, unity, and the raw, ecstatic energy of the Ruhr region. But on July 24, 2010, that ocean turned into a hydraulic press. By the end of the day, 21 young people would be dead, and over 650 others would be left with scars, both visible and invisible, that would never fully heal. The most chilling part of this tragedy isn't that it was a sudden, violent accident. It's that it was a slow, mathematical certainty, a disaster written in the blueprints and ignored in the emails long before the first baseline ever dropped. The story of the Duisburg Love Parade begins not with music, but with a city trying to prove its worth. Duisburg was smaller than the previous hosts, like Berlin or Dortmund, and it was eager to shine as the European capital of culture. To accommodate the massive crowd, organizers chose a former freight railway yard. It was an industrial island, hemmed in by active railway lines and a massive highway. There was only one primary way in and one primary way out, a 240-meter-long tunnel that led to a narrow concrete ramp. This configuration was a death trap in waiting. Expert warnings had been screaming into the void for months. The Duisburg Fire Brigade had explicitly warned that the yard was physically inadequate. The police had flagged glaring flaws in the security concept, but the momentum was too great. Local politicians and the event organizer, Rainer Schaller, viewed safety concerns as bureaucratic hurdles to be bypassed. Internal emails would later reveal that Schaller even instructed lawyers on how to circumvent legal requirements to ensure the party went ahead. As the sun rose on July 24th, the atmosphere in Duisburg was electric. Trains arrived every few minutes, vomiting thousands of ravers into the city center. People had traveled from across the globe. Clancy Ridley, a 27-year-old Australian on a dream tour of Europe. Elmar Laubenheimer, a respected lawyer from Dusseldorf. She and Clara Zapater and Marta Acosta, two Spanish exchange students who wanted one last farewell party before heading home. They were young, they were hopeful, and they were walking straight into a bottleneck. The first domino fell at noon. The opening was delayed by an hour because of unfinished construction work on the site. This meant that by the time the gates opened, 20,000 people were already compressed at the entrance, their frustration growing in the midday heat. Or as the afternoon wore on, the system began to fracture. The mobile phone network, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of users, collapsed around 3:30 p.m. In the operations center, the organizers were essentially blind. The surveillance cameras were defective. The loudspeaker system, a legal requirement for crowd control, didn't work. Down in the Karl-Lehr-Straße tunnel, the situation was shifting from celebratory to suffocating. Because the tunnel served as both the entrance and the exit, two massive, opposing flows of people collided in the darkness. Those in the back, still fueled by the distant thumping of the music, continued to push forward, unaware that those in the front were already pinned against a wall of human flesh. This is where the physics of mortality takes over. In crowd science, there is a threshold. When density reaches about 4 people per square meter, you lose the ability to move independently. At 6 people per square meter, you are no longer a person. You are part of a fluid. Witnesses described a terrifying sensation of standing in waves. The crowd began to oscillate in 18-second cycles, ripples of pressure moving through the mass of bodies. People weren't falling because they were panicking. They were falling because of crowd turbulence, a phenomenon where the collective force of thousands of people becomes so great that it behaves like a physical shockwave. The pressure in the tunnel and on the ramp reached levels as high as thousands of newtons per square meter. To the human body, this is lethal. Most of the victims didn't die from being trampled. They died from compressive asphyxia. This is a silent, terrifying way to go. Your chest is squeezed so tightly that your lungs cannot expand. You are standing upright, surrounded by 1,000 people, and you simply cannot take a breath. Survivors would later recall seeing people whose faces had turned blue, their eyes bulging with petechiae from the pressure, yet they remained standing because there was no room for their bodies to fall. At the edge of the ramp, a narrow metal staircase and an advertising billboard became the only visible escape routes. Desperate ravers tried to scale them, but in doing so, they created voids in the crowd. When someone fell or fainted, the pressure from behind instantly filled the gap, creating a pile of wedged bodies. It was here, in a small patch of concrete between a set of stairs and a sign, that the majority of the 21 victims lost their lives. And yet, just meters away, the party continued. The music floated over the walls of the yard, the bass still vibrating in the air while people were dying in the dirt below. Organizers, fearing that a sudden stop would cause a secondary panic and send 250,000 people rushing toward the already lethal exit, ordered the DJs to keep playing. For hours, the Love Parade existed as two parallel universes, one of euphoric dancing and one of blue-faced corpses being passed over the heads of a crowd that didn't even know they were gone. The aftermath was a long, cold winter of accountability that never quite arrived. Mayor Adolf Sauerland, who had championed the event for political prestige, initially refused to resign, claiming he wasn't personally responsible for the safety checks. The citizens of Duisburg eventually forced him out in a historic recall election in 2012, but the legal system was even slower. A criminal trial against 10 city officials and Lope event employees dragged on for a decade. It was a catastrophe after the catastrophe, filled with technical failures and expert reports that were deemed unusable. In 2020, 10 years after the tragedy, the trial was terminated without a single verdict. No one was held legally responsible for the 21 lives lost. The survivors were left to carry the weight alone. People like Wolfgang L., a carpenter who went for a short weekend jaunt and returned a broken man, haunted by the belief that he had stepped on someone in the crush. Thousands of attendees still suffer from survivor's guilt, unable to enter elevators or small rooms without a panic attack, untriggered by the phantom pain of being squeezed. The final bizarre twist in this story came years later. Rainer Schaller, the man who had pushed for the event and whose company had cut the security costs, met his own tragic end in October 2022. His private jet disappeared off the coast of Costa Rica, carrying him, his partner, and their 2 children. Their bodies were recovered from the Caribbean Sea, ending the chapter of the man who had once brought the art of love to Duisburg. Today, the Love Parade is gone, permanently cancelled after that dark Saturday in 2010. The freight yard in Duisburg stands as a somber monument to what happens when political ego and corporate greed ignore the fundamental laws of physics. It reminds us that in a massive gathering, the danger isn't the person next to you. It isn't a riot or a stampede. The danger is the density. The danger is the silence of a lung that can no longer expand. The Love Parade was meant to be a celebration of life, but in the end it was a forensic lesson in how quickly humanity can be turned into a fluid and how easily a dream of unity can be crushed under the weight of its own ambition.